Okay, last but not least, I'm going to introduce Stephen Ng. He has 30 years of experience in clinical and forensic counseling. Specifically, he works quite a bit with sexual offenders. His work is amazing. His story is amazing. I encourage you to look him up, to look on his page. His story is fascinating. His work is fascinating. He's literally written the book on human needs. It is called We Are All Like This. He also wrote Get Busy Living. He is the creator and host of a true crime podcast. True crime, I love true crime. Also, he co-hosts the podcast Managing Love Intelligently, correct? Okay, awesome. So he's kind of a big deal, and I'm very, very excited that he is able to be here. Also, if you're here for a CE credit, don't forget, they're like pointing at me, don't forget to sign up. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to move this mic, but I want to introduce to you Stephen King. Sorry, King. I'm sorry.
We're going to be talking about sexuality for the next hour. I presume that those of you who are in the know have already pre-gamed by drinking some delicious adult beverages, and then we will be talking about sex for about an hour. Not sex, intercourse sex, but sexuality. And then we could finish perhaps at the end by going out for a cigarette afterwards. That would be good. So I used to be a philosophy major back in my undergraduate days, and this particular philosopher I think really summarized the situation that I wanted to address today very well, because Ludwig Wittgenstein was trying to get across the idea that if we don't have the words to describe something, we're not going to be able to understand that thing. And when it comes to human sexuality, my experience has been that we don't really have the words to have adult conversations that would make sense. And why would I segue to a historic artifact like Ferdinand Magellan? Well, because in 1519, he set off on a trip around the world with approximately 230 men as his crew for 5 ships. And there should be a prize. We have some prizes today. Who can name the vitamin deficiency disease that killed almost all of his men?
Selenium.
Scurvy.
Who said scurvy? Okay, can you hand him? Okay, scurvy it is. So scurvy is a result of... So about how much vitamin C do you think we need every day in order to stay healthy?
500 milligrams.
Okay, I've stumped you, so okay. Just under 100. None of his men, back in the 1500s through the 1700s, which was the golden age of exploration, there really wasn't a lot of science around describing what people needed nutritionally. So as a consequence, I'm not exaggerating, literally millions of sailors died of scurvy. Oops. And strangely enough, Magellan had some knowledge of this that was kept secret in the Spanish Navy. And it's not funny. And he managed to lay in a supply of vitamin C for himself in the form of quince preserves. But he failed to make that available to the rest of his men. So he lost 208 out of 230 men, watched them die slowly over the 3 years of their trip. He didn't make it, so there was some sort of karma. And I don't know how that got on there. Just really weird. So the story is illustrative, I think, as a metaphor of how failing to manage our needs intelligently is a logical consequence of simply not knowing what those needs are. If you didn't know you needed vitamin C when you got shanghaied on one of those ships, you wouldn't go out of your way to be eating the cabbage or making sure that you obtain some source on the trip. Number two, our ignorance of our needs in turn means we have zero protection from the consequence of failing to attend to those needs. It's kind of a big deal. Today, I wanted to talk to you about sexuality having its own set of needs. Now, the reason I wanted to talk to you about that what propelled me to accept Dr. Cate's offer was that just a few years ago, I was the target of an attempted murder in my office. And my assailant, would-be assassin, he did something that, and you should learn from this, he did something that, should you ever want to assassinate a counselor, this is what you would do. You would ask, do you have a Kleenex I could use? Every counselor in America is going to turn, every counselor but me, is going to turn and go get you a Kleenex. So when I did, wasn't aware that he was following me, and then he pulled his knife and stabbed me in the neck, down toward my heart. And then I lost consciousness. I went down, and then he stabbed me again on the other side. And then I'm not a believer in God, but I do think something very unusual happened in that I rose to my feet and we fought for a while. And my office looked like a Dexter crime scene. And after that experience, well, you can imagine what effect that had on me thinking about my mortality and how I would like to go out and what I'd like to be known for. And so when Dr. Cate phoned, I thought, this is really what it's all about. Talking to Dr. Cate about sexuality. I want to do this. So I accepted her offer, and the reason I'm here today is I think this has been life-changing for me to take a look at human sexual needs. It's made my life so much better since I've been taking care of my own needs. And I dare you to listen to this today and not have it change your life forever. So it's my thesis that we as a people do not manage our sexuality intelligently, and furthermore that we can only do so after knowing what our needs are. We talk routinely in our culture about managing our careers intelligently, our academic careers, financial careers, our finances themselves, managing our workout schedules, managing really everything that we can think of intelligently, but somehow not sexuality. I started seeing what I found after working with sex offenders, and I don't even like to use that term. I like to say people who have been convicted of sexual crimes, because there's so much more to them than just calling them sex offenders would imply. But I wondered, why is it that people commit sex crimes? And the trainings that I took to get started all came up with just two answers: criminal thinking and sexual deviance. And I can assure you that neither one of these is particularly helpful. Criminal thinking meaning, well, they're criminals, and so of course they engage in broad spectrum criminal activities, and sexuality just is part of the damage that they do. Sexual deviance meaning that, well, they're perverts. They just do weird things. They're not like the rest of us. And my clients taught me through experience that that is simply not the case. Simply not true. Instead, they all agree that they were not managing their sexuality intelligently, and in treatment, I found that they were very motivated to learn how they might do so. When you think about it, of all the dimensions of your humanity, which ones fail to have concomitant needs? Academics have academic needs. We all have intellectual needs. Most of us who love beauty would say we have aesthetic needs. Wouldn't it be odd if we didn't have any sexual needs? We have all these different dimensions of our being, but each with its concomitant needs. And our colleagues throughout my reading, at least, have very little to say about sexual needs and sexual self-care. In fact, even just saying sexual self-care usually implies something about masturbation. So I know that the Costco Connection is not a peer-reviewed journal. But if you can, yeah, you can see that, right, on the far left of the screen. And as you read over the model that she's using for self-care, do you see anything missing? Of course. Let's take a look at another one. From the 2019 Journal of Counseling and Development, Wellness in Older Adulthood. So this is the model that was used, and I did read the article before coming. And under physical needs, sexuality wasn't mentioned. Under relational needs, surprisingly, sexuality was not included. It's odd, right? I even looked at the contextual. I was thinking maybe by some stretch of verbal juggling that perhaps that was there. Nope, it doesn't occur anywhere in this model. So apparently older adults really shouldn't have sexual needs. But I asked my wife, do I not look like a man with some sexual needs? And she agreed that that was true. From the 2022 Journal of Counseling and Development. Now this was a big deal. These 4 authors took a look at 8 wellness models. And again, as you look at the models, do you notice anything missing? On the far right, you don't have to read anything else. But on the far right, as you go, you can see that they all came up with very intriguing different ways of organizing human need, but never, even under love, did they include sexuality. Isn't that, can you do that bobblehead thing where you agree with me? That's odd. Yeah, okay, so we're all on the same page, that's cool. So how did mental health professionals become blind as sailors on Magellan's crew to their needs? Well, the same as everyone else. We haven't developed any language to explain this. Now, this is a quote from Justin Garcia, the executive director of the Kinsey Institute, and I saw it just before finishing up the touches on my slide deck, and I thought I have to include this because it's true, isn't it? I mean, it's been true for, gosh, forever. Does anybody remember Senator Proxmire? Yeah. And the vicious way he would attack funding on anything he thought was weird or unsavory? And that's when people in our business started learning, well, you just don't talk about that. We're not going to study that. Some of our confusion about our sexual needs is linguistic. It's really relatively easy to resolve that because we're not talking about that guy back from the fraternity who said, well, I have my needs. When we use the word need, we use it in 2 legitimate ways. We can talk about that which the organism requires in order to survive, but we also use the word need quite legitimately to talk about that which the organism requires in order to thrive. Children need to play. We all need an education. We all need friends. The second source of confusion is historic in nature, and really it goes back to the time before the Enlightenment, when the church pretty much regulated all human sexual conduct in Europe. The birth of modern science and the Enlightenment led to some really ill-mannered scientists like yourselves having authority problems with the church's take on all of this enlightenment. And so they came up with these two opposing worldviews. For religion, sexual behavior must be strictly controlled, lest sin enter the individual or the community. Sex is about good versus evil. There are no sexual needs, only mere desires. Science has, I think, a different perspective on behavior in general, and including sexual behavior, we could say that it's simply behavior. It's to be studied, it's to be understood, and eventually to be managed intelligently with respect to bodily autonomy and needs. So there was an armistice in the early stages of the Enlightenment, where science got to have all the items on the left, which of course they were going to regret letting us have biology, because eventually Darwin came along. But the church got to keep everything related to the human soul, and yes, that included psychology and sex. And then we had Freud visit us a little later. So here we are 100 years post-Freud and 500 years post-Magellan, and just what have we figured out so far about our sexual needs? So I would like to invite you to join me in a little thought experiment, which is the basis for a textbook I wrote. Well, a book that I ended up being used as a textbook. I actually just wrote it together. You know when you have an idea in your head and it's like a thorn or a splinter, and you just have to write it out to get it out of your head? That's kind of how this was for me. I'd like you to join me in this thought experiment where you imagine the perfect life, the perfect childhood, the perfect relationship, perfect in every way. And as we get going, to just imagine if we tease out just one small little piece of our nurturing, of our upbringing, to figure out, is it really going to be perfect anymore? So all the photographs you see are all friends of mine who volunteered for these photos, and I look at them and it's like looking at family. So for me, this is a fun thought experiment. This little boy. So imagine, in terms of sexual safety, do we all need sexual safety? Do even babies need sexual safety? Well, I was lecturing one group of parents, and a very angry mother said, well, that's ridiculous, that's just physical needs. But I have so many thousands of sex offender examples. There I am using that term again. I have so many examples from the lives of people convicted of sex crimes that involve no physical touch whatsoever, no physical harm whatsoever, just taking pictures and not hurting a soul. But if you and I walked in on that, would we feel that that baby was being endangered? Yes, and we can get an amen on that. Yes, and amen on that. And violated, sure. And would most of us as parents fly into a rage and be very defensive? Of course, quite understandably. So I think the point of this first example is to imagine that from the moment of birth, that transition, that metamorphosis into becoming a baby, coming from a fetus to a baby, we suddenly have sexual needs. And they never go away. We never outgrow them. This little girl is about as adorable as it gets. I think the world would explode in adorableness if she was any more adorable. But the need for innocence, to be able to take in knowledge as one is emotionally prepared to receive it and integrate it into one's life. We all agree that children have a need for innocence. I'll go ahead.
Amen.
Or amen. I can go church or otherwise. So yeah, innocence. And these are going to go pretty quickly. The need for age-appropriate information. Okay, I'm looking for assent, and I want this to be non-consensual. So the need to simply be sexual beings. Yeah, for little boys and girls to want to figure out their roles, to figure out, well, what is a real man? How do I do that? How do I, for a girl like this, how do I get to be as pretty as my mom? The need for boundaries. She's adorable. For privacy. So a lot of my very careful parents are such hovering helicopter parents that they don't want to let their children have any kind of privacy, but just the privacy to have a conversation on a telephone between a boy and a girl he has a crush on. Doesn't that seem like something normal childhood development would need? Yeah, because no? Rebel in every crowd. All right. I think it's necessary, and I'll tell you why. I think it's necessary because we have to learn sometime. If not over the phone at that age, when would it be appropriate? We're going to wait till after puberty? Should we wait maybe till they're 18 before they learn to start having these kinds of conversations and figuring out how to talk to the opposite sex? The need for sexual conversations, to be able to talk freely about sexual matters as the child feels comfortable doing. Mommy, where do babies come from? The answer is going to be very different at age 4 than it is at age 8 or 12. Sexual play and humor. Now, I included this in the prepubescent group because I think it's true. Children like telling dirty jokes, and I'm not looking at anyone in particular because I know you all did. But sexual play, being what the grown-ups would call inappropriate, that's part of our learning. And so, let me fast forward to your adult years. If you were in an adult relationship that was perfectly satisfying with someone who loves you as much as you love them, who desires you as much as you desire them, and we just pull out the concept of sexual play and humor. You ask them if they like to have sex, and they grimly reply, let's do this. Is that going to be a sustainable relationship? Right. Sexual dignity. So when children see parents kiss for the first time or adults kiss for the first time, a lot of times the reaction is, ew. I think it's really important for parents to keep kissing and repeatedly because we're teaching our children through example that, no, this is okay. This is a part of being a human being, and that there's nothing shameful, wrong, or ridiculous about it. Okay, it might be a little ridiculous when I do it, but it's perfectly normal, and that little boy is really lucky to have a mom and dad who are so comfortable expressing affection. As we become older and hit puberty, our needs evolve. So the need for sexual thoughts. Yeah, he's not thinking sexual thoughts particularly, but somebody is. And the nice thing about having, I've spent many years of my life in the church, and if you remember, if you're good people, you'll all remember the Sermon on the Mount. You'll remember it by heart, of course. And whosoever looketh on a woman with lust in his eyes hath committed, thank you, yes, adultery in his heart. But if we can't be aware of our thoughts, can we even hope to manage our sexual behavior intelligently? No. I'm looking for commitment. No, that is not possible. The need for sexual fantasy. By the way, she is wearing clothes underneath the sheet. But the need for sexual fantasy is the way we try ideas on for size. So I've never kissed anyone like that. Oh, I've never done that other sexual activity. Or what would it be like to go out with them? What would it be like to be married to somebody like that? Those are all sexual fantasies, right? What sexuality includes orientation and gender and all the behaviors, the private thoughts. Everything is part of our sexuality there. And do you need to be able to try ideas on for size before you go there? Absolutely, right? So there's a need for sexual fantasy. And if you didn't have that, and I had many clients who've been cautioned about this, and this is standard for sex offender counseling across the country, I'm sorry to say, that sexual fantasy is considered highly suspicious behavior. And there is a city that I know of where the sex offender treatment program includes the handing out of ampules of smelling salts. You would break one of those ampules anytime you have a sexual thought. And I asked, anytime? Because I would have to just wear it broken around the neck. And they said, yeah, anytime you're supposed to take a good snort of that as aversion conditioning. Imagine that you were in a relationship, but your partner never, ever touched you in the way that a partner would touch another partner. Would that be sustainable? Would that be perfect anymore? No. That girl's got to go on. The need to desire. If you were in a relationship in which you felt flatline, zero desire for your partner. Okay, some of you are laughing already, right? You know where I'm going with this, right? It's not going to work. So what about to be desired? Do you need to be desired? I know that I do, and I know, okay, 50% of you do. Okay, 55%. Going on. As opposed to intercourse, the need for sexual intimacy. This is, does anybody here know Dennis Bagarozzi? He's an Atlanta native, I think. He wrote a book called Intimacy in Marriage, or Improving Intimacy, no, Enhancing Intimacy in Marriage. And I was kind of hoping to meet him. He's been a hero of mine for a long time. He defines intimacy as the ability to safely share my life with another person. Really works. Now, I'm old enough to remember Perry Mason shows from the 60s being on TV. And when Perry Mason would lean forward to ask a witness in the court, isn't it true that you and the defendant on the night in question were intimate? And of course, they were using it as a euphemism for sex. Sexual intimacy is actually the ability to safely share one's sexuality with another, not necessarily intercourse. So, working as I do with the ex-cons in Maine, we'll do some work on sexual fantasies. We actually do quite a lot of work on sexual fantasies. And I'll ask them if they can give me an example of one. And inevitably, there'll be one guy, there's always one guy, usually with ADHD, who's got one that's super fun. And the whole group is just cracking up. And after we get done laughing, I'll say, is that the kind of thing you could share with your wife? Oh God, no, she'd kill me. So what you're saying is, as a heterosexual in a group of heterosexual men, you actually have more sexual intimacy with us than you do with your partner? He was really disturbed when I said that. And rightfully so, I think, because ideally, no, I don't want in that room. I want to get out of there. The need for sexual pleasure, I don't think we need to belabor the point. The need for sexual release, yeah. The need for a sexual identity. All the women look pretty similar from the knees up, but from the ankle down, they're pretty different. Including that one in the middle with the fishnet stockings. The need for sexual acceptance. This is from a wedding that we hosted at my house. And yeah, they look so happy. But can you imagine have you ever been, I'm gonna ask, this is a delicate one. So you don't have to raise your hand, but just by show of hands, could anybody remember a romantic relationship you were ever in where you experienced less than the sexual acceptance that you actually needed? About half of us, roughly. Yeah, and how many of us, show of hands to the whole audience, how many of us really believe that there is a definite a need for sexual acceptance in a marriage or relationship? We have 100%, except for no, everybody. Maybe, yeah. Yes, okay. Yes. So for sexual approval, which it's very obvious how much sexual approval there's going on between these two. Sexual guidance and coaching, this is a married couple who, boy, they had such different backgrounds and they had to teach each other what they were looking for and what they needed. And this is my office mate and his wife. He's from Brazil. They're a very happy couple. But under sexual risk and adventure, what I mean is if you're in a relationship with a partner and you've sucked out all the sexual risk and adventure to where there's none anymore, would that be really sustainable for you? 3 of us agree, no. This was our oldest couple, and he is gone now. But at the time, even posing for this picture, they had so much joy as a couple. So sexual love, what I'm saying there, and what I mean by that is the sexual love one has for the beloved, as opposed to the love one has for a child or a pet or one's favorite brand of toilet paper. Sexual love is unique. And I think finally, yes, God, he looks horrible. There's a need to integrate sexuality and spirituality. And I think I've shared already that I'm not a believer, but I still think of myself having spiritual needs. And so I commissioned an artist to do something very special for you to illustrate this. And there. Okay, so, right, it's not that great. But I think what spirituality offers us is context and meaning to our sexuality. But the great thing about sexuality that's really underreported is how it grounds spirituality in such a way that it makes a mockery of the brain's attempt to write checks that the body cannot cash. So, for example, this is one of the things that I dislike about religion, all the thou shalt nots. So I know it's not in the Bible, but I do have a lot of religious clients who believe it's a sin to masturbate. It's aberrant behavior. It's what is it called? A mortal sin. And yet, if I ask them about their history of masturbation, once they learn to trust me and they can relax and be themselves, all of their attempts to stop masturbating have been wildly successful, would you guess? Based on your own life experience, I would say no, probably not. So there needs to be, I believe, a dialogue between sexuality and spirituality so that the one can affirm and confirm the other. So like my predecessor who was up here talking about the need for more research, I too am pleading with the researchers in the room to take a look at what's happening when we're unable to discuss sexual needs. There's an escalating influence of religion, yes. We have marriage and family therapists who can't talk about sexuality, even though there would be no marriages or families without sexuality. Usually even when you go to a sex therapist, what is the topic of the conversation? Sexuality or, intercourse. So there's a real difficulty in finding funding. We've talked about that. And then on a personal level, continued ignorance of our own needs, which does affect our ability to build successful relationships. Our continued inability to manage our sexuality intelligently affects us all in the worst possible ways. The consequences of our individual failures. This next slide is for those who are under the age of 40. Is there anyone under 40 who can name all 6 of those people?
She's gonna do it.
No. Oh my goodness. Oh, I didn't tell you. This is a video of a colleague of ours. He had the most successful forensic practice in his community, which was a large city on the West Coast. He is a client of mine currently and actually texted me this morning, "Good luck in Atlanta. You know, please let everybody know I'm managing my sexuality intelligently." He was a licensed psychologist for 40 years. When he caught his crime, and he spent out of the last 10 years, 4 of them were in federal prison.
My sixth crime was possession of child pornography. And I had worked with victims of sexual abuse, children mostly, not only, but mostly, for many years, probably 30 years. And towards the last few years, I occasionally was in possession of pornography given to me, usually in the form of thumb drives or what do you call it? Things that run the computer, the CPU, hard drive. Thank you. I received that pornography from my patients, my adult patients. But my crime was that at a certain point, I looked at that pornography. Now, I had never done that without the patient present, but I did look at it at some point, and it was a low point in my life. And I'm not using that as an excuse, but it was a time in my life where I think I stopped caring about a lot of things, and I stopped really taking care of myself in a lot of kind of basic ways. It affected my life in just about every way I can imagine. Of course, my family was shocked. I just felt so bad, so ashamed, so guilty, so humiliated, and really, really let down all my patients, and of course my family. It affects how I think of myself, even though I think I have pretty good self-esteem. Because I hurt so many people, it feels impossible to ever get over the level of shame and the level of kind of humiliation. And that's all this kind of self stuff, but the pain I cause others through this action. I can't imagine ever figuring out a way to get over it. I would say don't be an idiot. Don't be so arrogant that you can do something that is blatantly illegal and think there's nothing wrong. I think I would tell myself to look inward and remember your empathic side, the side that's so good at looking at other people's pain, and realize that this kind of thing would cause so many people so much pain. And I really had turned that side off for a while during my own crisis. And I wish I could, tell that part of myself, wake up. If I could speak to myself from my point of view now, I'd say, "What the fuck are you doing, asshole?" I would speak to my denial. This sense of, I'm the good guy. I can never be seen as a bad guy. And certainly after this, I was certainly by any law enforcement, but a lot of other people in my family even seen as a bad guy.
Okay, so this particular individual who I really care about and love, he just I was talking earlier about how some people mistake sexual intercourse for intimacy. For him, he had a different thinking error in that he believed that romance was intimacy, candlelight, soft music. He used to be, believe it or not, a rock and roll musician, and he would serenade the women in his life. He always told me in our therapy that he always had had lots of intimacy, and he's still figuring out that romance itself is just romance. It's not really safely sharing your life with anyone. So, thank you so much. I have one thing I'd like to say, and that is, thinking about Magellan, we're faced with I think, an existential choice in that we have three options. We could continue on knowing what we know, the way Magellan did, taking care of ourselves and to hell with everyone else. We could conceivably go back into some sort of state where we remain oblivious to our sexual needs and pretty much live as one of the crew on Magellan's voyage. Or, and I'm hoping you choose this latter one, we could be part of that vital mental health community that has compassion on human suffering and begins researching, teaching, and counseling people how they could begin managing their sexuality intelligently. Thank you.